Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Where does privacy end and protection begin? In the world of online games, things aren't always very clear. The New York Times reports that incidents of abuse are emerging with unprecedented frequency around the country, with some perpetrators grooming hundreds and even thousands of victims, according to a review of prosecution, court records, law enforcement reports, and academic studies. Games are a common target, but predators are also finding many victims on platforms like Instagram and Kick Messenger. So why do you care about this? Well, keep in mind, most of these are kids that we're talking about. And the article is entitled, "While they play online, children may be prey. Predators are using gifts and game currency to trap minors in sextortion schemes." So it's a growing problem, and I think that's one of the main things that we should be paying attention to. The number of cases has risen significantly in recent years from where it was before. So it's not like it's always been here and it's always been at the same level. It's getting worse. And there's, I think, also that mindset, Lance, of, it won't happen to my kid until it does. And so that's part of why we're talking about it. But then there's also this larger question that we'll talk about in the third segment of the show about should platforms like Facebook, Instagram, or in this case, Discord, which is a platform where gamers can chat while playing, should those platforms bear any level of responsibility for illegal activity on their sites? So those are the questions we're looking at, but of course we couldn't begin a conversation on kids, parenting, privacy, and all things technology without
your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, I think the biggest reason that it's growing is, as the article pointed out, as they interviewed parents, most parents didn't realize this was even a thing. So it's lack of even knowledge out there, as we say. Information is king. The more, which is why we're doing the show, is that we're trying to get the word out there so that people who have children or grandchildren and let them play on their video games and let them play their gaming sites, know that this is something that can happen. Because I know that when I read the article, it makes sense that you can do this, but I didn't know that. I'm not a gamer of this generation. I played games back when they came out.
Back in the day.
I went to the video game parlor and played on, played pinball and Atari and
the parlor
on all those kind of things. And then when I had Intellivision and some of the things that came out, but there was never this ability to get on the internet and then talk to people while you played. So I think
talk to strangers.
The key is right. Well, no, anybody. When the games I grew up playing, you couldn't talk to anybody else. You might have multiple game player in your house, but you all had to physically be together to play. And so I think the important thing about today is let's get the word out there, because again, once more people find out that this is going on, the more things will be done to prevent this from occurring, which will hopefully stop the growth.
So let's talk a little bit about how exactly this comes to be. Lance has kind of touched on it. The biggest part of this, I think, that makes it accessible to predators, right, is the anonymous nature of most online gaming and chatting. You create what's generally referred to as a screen name or username, and essentially this doesn't have to bear any resemblance to your real name at all. And oftentimes they're not even actual names. They're, a string of words, numbers, etc. And so there's that component where you can be totally anonymous and you can say I'm 18 and be 84, or vice versa. You could be 13 and say that you're 28, So, there's that component that kind of creates an environment for the following to take place. The article says, quote, "After making contact, predators often build on the relationship by sending gifts or gaming currency such as V-Bucks in Fortnite. Then they begin desensitizing children to sexual terms and imagery before asking them to send naked pictures and videos of their own. I think, I don't know about you, Lance, but the text conversations that they shared in the article, which are real conversations from court cases, are pretty disturbing but powerful. And I think it's important for people to understand. So the person A, in this case, the predator, says, "I'm about to post your pics. If you don't chat me back in 10 minutes. The kid says, "Sorry, I haven't been on since Thanksgiving morning. I've had a lot of stuff going on with my mom in the hospital. I'm with my little sister, my aunt, and my granda."
It's just a typo.
Right. And I can't talk right now. Predator: "Yes, you can. You want me to post your pics everywhere? ? I only want 10 more pics and I will leave you alone forever. If not, I will show everyone." And then the kid: "Okay, I swear I'll get your 10 pics by tonight. Can you tell me the 10 pics you want? I swear I'll get them to you by tonight." And then the predator: "How old is your sis baby, your baby sister?" The kid replies, 7. "Send me some pics of her instead." The kid: "Wait, what kind of pics?" Reply: "I don't care. Naked. LOL." Back to the kid: "My little sister is 7 years old. I'm not going to take naked pictures of her." Predator: "Okay, well, I'm going to post your pics. Then I want a few of her and you, okay?" And then the kid: "Please, that's my little sister. I can't do that to her. I beg you, please."
Well, you're making my skin crawl. I don't even want to hear that. I don't even know if I like the fact that you're reading it out there, because it just makes my skin crawl. But this is what people are doing. This is what's happening. And when you talk about it, and I can't find the exact place in the article, but it talks about young children like this between the ages of 8 and 15. It's like 97% of young boys, young males, are playing these kind of video games, and 83% or something it said, and again, my numbers may be off because I can't find it, but 83% of young females are playing these kind of games where they are exposed to these types of people. And it doesn't mean that they're all getting those kinds of messages or those kinds of contacts, but they're exposed to it. If they're online playing with strangers, and over 80% of all young people, according to the study, are doing this, then every one of them have the opportunity to be confronted like this, or as the article uses the word, to be groomed, because it doesn't start this way.
No.
It doesn't start with that.
Yeah.
That's where it ends up. And all of the things, they build the relationship, and they start with other things. They talked about how they offer them money or gaming cards or special tools or weapons that they can use for their game. And then the person's like, "Oh yeah, this is going to make me a better player." And it's all of that and all that trust and everything that develops. And then they get to the point that you were reading that was making my skin crawl. But that's the way people who are predators operate. Right. They gain the trust. They work through it. They know how to play the psychology to get to that point. But the point is, the vast majority of our young people are open to these kinds of attacks because they're playing the kind of games where predators have now gone. The path of least resistance. This is as the article pointed out, this is where kids are today. Right. So the predators follow. Predators, why do you have to be careful of watching your child when you go to the park? Because that's where that's where predators are, because that's where the young kids are.
And now this is right. This is
just the 21st century version of that.
An even easier way for them to do it, because it removes because you can hide. Right.
You're not even out in public.
It's easy to hide. Yeah. So the part of the reason that I read the conversation is because I want people to get a sense of imagining your child or a kid who feels like they have no option, okay? Because when you read that and you listen to it, they don't feel like they have a choice anymore. They feel like, okay, I made a mistake. They have access to my photos now. And if I don't do what I'm told, then my family, my school, the kids that I know, they'll all know this stuff, so what do I do other than keep complying? And of course, there's one message about, I only want 10 more pics and I'll leave you alone forever. That's never how it works. It's, now I have more,
blackmail.
Right. Now I have more pictures of you, but if you don't do it, then, then they're saying we'll release them anyway. So that to me is what leads us into the next thing about parenting and what role the platforms and law enforcement play, because the fact that it ever gets to this point where the kid's in this situation and then they feel trapped, because then they don't feel like they have any option to talk to anyone, or things will only get worse for them.
Well, it's like Special Agent for Homeland Security says, and this is a quote, "The first threat generally is, if you don't do this, I'm going to post on social media. And by the way, I've got a list of your family members and I'm going to send it to all of them. And then if you don't send another picture, then here's your address. See, I know where you live. I'm going to come and harm your family."
Right.
I mean, it's,
so then it's not.
And those of us, who would never think of doing things like this, we can't even imagine that another adult would do something like this to a child. But the point is, as you are making, yeah, folks, it goes on. So now what can we do to protect our children?
So the stats you were mentioning before, by the way, you got them right, Lance. Almost every single teenage boy in America, 97%, plays video games, while about 83% of girls do, according to the Pew Research Center. In many states, gaming counts as a team sport and can earn players a varsity letter. Colleges offer scholarships to elite gamers, and cities are racing to establish professional teams. The industry is enormously profitable, generating over $43 billion in revenue last year in the United States. So this is a huge industry. 97% of teenage boys, 83% of teenage girls. Like Lance said, if you wonder why the predators are here, that tells it all. It's probably the easiest and most anonymous place to access them. We're going to talk about the parents' role coming up next, and we'll end the show by talking about, where do platforms come in? Platforms that facilitate these chats, Facebook, Instagram, etc. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
97% of teenage boys in America and 83% of teenage girls play video games online, according to Pew Research Center. This is no doubt why we see so many and a rising issue with predators in this space. We've talked so far about kind of how it works, how the predators make their entry in this, and it deals a lot with the fact that they're more anonymous than almost anywhere else, and then they employ very common psychological tactics to trap and threaten kids who are not prepared to deal with this. And that, I think, leads us right into, Lance, right? Where do the parents come in? And the article points out in a lot of different places, parents aren't telling their kids at 6 years old, keep your clothes on online. And they're not talking. A lot of them aren't talking with their kids about this stuff because they don't really know that it can happen. Some of it's not a parent is unwilling to talk about it. A parent hasn't even thought that it's a possibility. So how do you combat something like that? Because that goes back to kind of that thing that we've talked about, Lance, right? Of you can't hope to solve a problem if you don't know a problem exists, and nobody thinks it can happen to their kid.
Well, as I said at the beginning of the show, that's why we're talking about this today, is to try to get the word out there for people. And as the article started, the mother said, I make him play the games where I can watch. And that's how she discovered what was going on. Now, it had already gotten pretty intimate by the time she discovered it, but at least she was doing something in the fact that she was making them play the game or games where she could walk behind him and watch what was going on. And I mean, I remember that with our daughters when the computer first came into our home and we allowed them to, it was dial-up internet, but it was still dial-up access to the internet. The rule was the computer screen faced out into the living room where anybody could see it at all times. and I understand you can go back and forth between screens and all these other kinds of things now, but still, it was at least we were doing what I felt like was the best we could do. My wife and I felt were the best we could do to watch where our children were going and what sites they were on. And, and so you just have to make yourself aware. And hopefully by listening to this show and talking amongst your friends to people who didn't listen, people will start to understand that your kid's just not playing Fortnite or Minecraft and just having a good time in there. And it's not serving as a surrogate babysitter or whatever, but there are real dangers there. And you say, well, but and here's where I get it, because it's, I'm not so worried about the teenagers. Like I'm currently working with a group of teenagers in the public school system. I'm not worried about them being coerced to do something, but then which I know I should be, but I'm not as worried about them. But then like you were reading, hey, how old's your little sister? 7 years old. So now the teenager is put in a response. Now they're going to bring in other people.
Right.
So it's just that slippery slope, and you've got to stop it. And the way you get parents involved is to talk about it. And then again, and I'll let you take it back, the parents have to get involved. It's like everything else about being a parent. You have to talk to your child about it. You have to make them aware. And again, how much do you tell them? Like we said in a previous show, you tell them whatever it is that they need to know that will take care of them, that satisfies their curiosity.
Right.
You don't have to go deep into where it could go. Just, hey, you're going to follow these rules. And the biggest thing I liked, and it kind of upset me when we first read it on the prep part of the show, and that was a person, psychologist or whomever, says, well, I empower parents to tell their kids there are rules. What? Another adult has to tell you as the parent that you have the right to make rules governing your child's life? I mean, come on, folks. You're the parent. You're in charge. Another adult doesn't have to tell you that you are empowered to make rules for your children's gaming. And it goes in there and it goes on to say, I tell them they have the right to limit their game playing, that it is a privilege to play on the gaming system. It is not your natural born right. And I guess I just have a real problem with that, but I guess that's what needs to be told. I guess there are people out there who say, their kids say, well, it's my right to play. It's my game. I bought it with my money. No, you're a minor. You're living in my house.
Well, it's
you're
good
still
that these
rules.
Parents are getting that.
It is good, but to me, it's sad.
Right.
It's a sad state of affairs that people don't understand that to begin with. But yes, it is a good thing that there are people out there, professionals out there, telling parents these things.
Yeah. Well, and in this case, you have parents that obviously
they're seeking advice.
Right. They're seeking it. So, the bigger concern is the parents who don't know and don't care enough to seek it, or believe, that's some kind of, and that's the whole thing.
And
right?
Is there anything we can do for them? I mean, if they're not listening to our shows and they don't know that the trouble exists, we really can't expect them to do anything about it. And that's what the predators are hoping for.
Sure.
So that's why the word has to get out. And so many times we don't want to talk about things like this because, it makes us feel uncomfortable. Like me, I said, it makes my skin crawl.
Yeah.
But if we don't talk about it, then the word doesn't get out. It's like the young lady who said, she went through this when she was 13 to 17 and finally got it dealt with. And then she went to college and she goes, and I found out many of her dorm mates said, oh yeah, that's what happened to me too. Mm-hmm. Again, once we start to talk about it, we find out, oh, I'm not the only one who's gone through this. And then that starts to stop this and get laws changed and it makes us feel better when we know that. I mean, I remember when, you find out that you have your car accident,
mm-hmm.
Or you get a speeding ticket or whatever. And then you ask somebody like, oh yeah, I got that one. I got my first speeding ticket when I was 19 or, I had a car accident and luckily nobody was hurt, but I was 23 and I was all of a sudden you're like, oh, there are other people in the world that have this happen to them. I'm just picking out other things, but it's the same concept. And that is you have to talk about it. Don't sit there. And again, if you're a young person listening to our show and this is happening to you, go to an adult that you respect and talk to them about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't let the predator have that power over you. You know, I mean, we're sitting here talking about the parenting, I know, but that just popped into my head. If you're a young person listening to podcasts, because the probability is fairly high.
Sure.
And this is happening to you, step out to someone that you trust within your realm, whether it's somebody at, a teacher at school, or the principal, or the guidance counselor, or someone in your church, or wherever, or somebody that you trust in.
You need to let somebody know.
Let an adult know so that they can step in and give you the guidance that you need to know, and understand that you're not out there alone facing all this.
So the article lays out some guidelines that really a few of them Lance or I have already hit. So we'll just run through them quickly. The first one, set rules for when and how your child can interact with others online. Next, spend time with your child on new games and apps. And I think that's kind of like the, going to see, before you let your kid go see the movie, go see it yourself, you know, or go with them to see it, so that if there's things that you feel are questionable afterwards, you can talk about it. And that goes right into the next one. Talk to your child about online safety. And I think this last one, Lance, this is huge. And listen, because this goes to that thing we've talked about so often with lawmakers in Washington who just don't understand this stuff. Young people often understand it better than you do as the parent. And if you're willing to listen and they know that, they're probably going to tell you what you need to know to be able to help them, but if it's not clear to them that you're willing to listen, then you get into this, they don't feel like they can tell anybody type of thing, and they get scared, and then they don't tell anybody. And then it goes as far as it has in some of these court cases. Encourage your child to raise any concerns with a trusted adult. I think that goes into the listening thing and what Lance brought up. Be on the lookout for warning signs of abuse. Okay. So these are knowing what to look for, especially if, your kid is being real secretive about what's going on. That's part of what the psychologist talks about, or seems more depressed than usual, or is spending an inordinate amount of time on a game. Right. Whatever it may be, look for those signs, because sometimes if they're not ready to talk to you, doesn't mean you can't pick up on the fact that something. But
part of that is developing that relationship with your child before it ever gets to this point.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean you have to be your child's friend, be your child's parent. That's two totally different ideas and concepts, and it's like, and I'm going to just real quickly, but I remember the first time that we had HBO when it first came out, and I was a young teenager, and I sat down and an R-rated movie came on, and my mom was sitting there. And I maybe have shared this with you before, but I'm like, oh God, I hope my mom leaves. Well, she didn't leave.
Yeah.
She did a parenting thing. She sat there and watched an R-rated movie with her young son. And when it was over, she goes, so did that make you feel uncomfortable? Are you all right? She goes, I go, well, yeah. And she goes, well, if you're uncomfortable about it, then you're probably not old enough to watch it. If you can't sit here and watch it with your mom, then why are you watching it in the first place?
Right.
And I'm like, wow. And I've always thought about how tough that was for me. But as we're talking about this, it made me think of that again. And I see it from my mom. How hard was that for my mother?
Right.
To do that. But yet
pretty uncomfortable.
But yet here I am 40 years later, and it still had an impact.
Right.
On me. And the fact that she did that. You know what I'm saying? And kudos to my mom, who has long passed away, but taught me that lesson. That as a parent, okay, it may be uncomfortable for you to bring this up or to be there to talk to your child about this, but you're still doing the right thing because you're giving them that outlet to talk about.
Right.
And they know that you care about them.
So, the last three, educate your child about blocking users who make them uncomfortable. This is pretty much a built-in feature these days on all apps. It's usually really quick, really simple. Make sure that your kid's comfortable doing that and knows that they have that option. If somebody starts to do anything that makes them uncomfortable, they don't have to ever interact with them on that platform, So, just take the quick and easy steps to head it off at the pass. Don't blame your child if abuse arises. It perpetrates problems in the future, right? If they get in this situation again, then they're not likely to tell you about it. And that's obviously the opposite of what you're after. And then this last one, Lance should love. Take charge as your child's online protector. No one else will. Now, that leads us into what we're going to talk about next, which is where does the law come into play? And should platforms be held responsible for activity on their sites? We've got lots more to talk about, so keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Where does privacy end and protection begin? Well, that's what we've been trying to answer so far. We've looked at, Lance, we've talked a little bit about how this happens in the first place. How do kids become prey online? We've broken that down kind of in the first segment. And then in the last segment, we talked a decent amount about parents' role, right? And what their responsibility is in this endeavor. But like so many things, it's not just the kids, it's not just the parents, but we also need to talk about the law, i.e. law enforcement. What are they doing, right? What's working and what's not. And then also the platforms themselves, the places that these conversations are taking place, and ultimately illegal activity occurs. What level of responsibility they have. So
I said to you earlier when we were in the pre-show meeting, I said the key, and this is why we put it second, was talking to the parents.
Yes.
Because I think once you get the parents involved, then they will start to put pressure on the legislative branch of government and also on these sites to start to do things, because for the most part, the parents still control the pocketbook, right? I mean, it's like,
sure.
Okay, now that I found out about this as a parent, I'm going to want somebody to do something about this. And I'm going to say, well, you know what then? I'm not going to buy this new game, or I'm not going to let my child be on this site. And then all of a sudden, these sites are going to have to respond because these parents have gotten involved. And I think that's why, as we did the show and planned the show, talking about the parents was really important. And now parents need to get involved, as you talked about. And as they get involved, that will force some of these sites to do some things. But that's, how much should they do? I mean, what do we think they should do?
Right. Well, and so there has been, and this is an encouraging thing. There's been some proactive, or reactive, I suppose, depending on but there's been some efforts by law enforcement, to do the equivalent of, and Lance said this during the break, sting operations, basically. It's just instead of doing them, in person or with somebody undercover, in person, this is happening online. And in New Jersey, several police departments were flooded with phone calls from parents and teachers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Alarmed about pedophiles lurking on game sites and in chat rooms. And so law enforcement officials from across the state, so parents brought it up, right? Law enforcement officials are taking action. They got together. They took over a building near the Jersey Shore last year and started chatting under assumed identities as children. In less than a week, they arrested 24 people. In less than a week, right? Nearly every game has a chat, so it's hard for parents to fully keep track, even if they're doing their homework, said Lillian Daniel, a deputy attorney general in New Jersey and one of the operations leaders. Quote, so we realized there were these unregulated conversations happening. And I think that right there is right. They got pressure, which is what we talked about, from parents and teachers who were saying, hey, this is a problem. We need your guys' help. And then they set up, obviously, what was a pretty successful operation,
right,
to do their job and to be part of it, because you can be an ultra vigilant parent, but if you have law enforcement on your side and working with you, chances are you're going to have better success.
But everybody was doing their due diligence.
Right.
Teachers had heard about this, obviously, from their students at school, and then they had reported it. Parents had found out about it or heard about it at school. Maybe the school sent home a newsletter saying, hey, be careful. We're getting reports from law enforcement that this is going on, or from the students that this is going on. And then the law enforcement got involved. So all three steps, the kids talked about it, the parents and the teachers got involved, and the law enforcement, they all got involved. They all did their due diligence. And wow, we start to cut into the problem a little bit. Everybody just, again, has to step up and not be afraid to talk about the situation, even if, like I stated in the beginning of the show, some of this content makes you uncomfortable. You still have to step up and do something about it so we can solve the problem or make the problem better.
Now, it's true that there was quite some success. They went on to test it in a suburb close to New York City. They made 17 arrests, and they did it once more in Somerset County toward the center of the state, arresting 19 people. One defendant was sentenced to prison. The other cases are still pending. Here's the thing though, Lance. After the sting, the officials had hoped to uncover a pattern that could help in future investigations. Unfortunately, they found none. Those arrested came from all walks of life. Among them were a police officer, a teacher, a minister, a nurse, a bank manager, a mechanic, a waiter, a dental hygienist, a college student, and a delivery man. Quote, it cuts across all social and racial lines, across class lines. It cuts across every line, Ms. Hoffman said. There is no profile. And so that's why the other efforts that we're talking about, I think, are so critical, because if there really isn't a profile that police can latch onto, it's ever more important that when these problems arise, the parents and teachers, right, are making it known to law enforcement that they need their help and they need to set up an operation like this to capture, 24 people, then 17, then 19 people, all within a matter of a few weeks.
Right.
And that definitely curtails it,
Right.
So I think
word will get out around
right
the predator community that it's, at least in that part of the country, it's becoming tougher. But it obviously needs to spread.
Yes.
Because as you said, that's just the state of New Jersey stepping up and doing something in 3 parts of their state.
Right.
It's not a
It's not the
nationwide
national
thing.
No.
It's not any kind of national idea of policing going on.
So then this next thing gets to a question that we may do a separate show on at some point, Lance, because we only have so much time, but I think it's important to discuss, which is this has been coming up in Congress a lot lately, especially with some of the, like Cambridge Analytica stuff in regards to Facebook and the 2016 election. But it's also coming up in other places too. And this is one of them, game chat rooms, private messenger, etc. What level of responsibility do platforms, and I'm using that in air quotes, do these tech companies bear? Because they've always positioned themselves as a platform, right? And said that we are merely a medium for communication. We are not a media company. We're not like a newspaper who makes editorial decision about what to put in and what not to put in, right? Everything's fair game, quote unquote, except it's not though.
It isn't.
Because 2 things. They have their own set of rules, right?
Right.
Where they say these things aren't fair game. And then you've got the law. So it's kind of a contradictory thing. But part of what's been highlighted and part of the discussion that's brewing in Washington is this back and forth on how much should we make them responsible for these things? Because part of the reason they were able to grow and become the companies that they are now is because for the most part, they were just allowed to exist in this gray area of, as long as you, the company, aren't actively doing anything illegal, we won't hold you liable for the illegal things that people do in your space. Now, this isn't exactly the same thing, Lance, but it's kind of akin to if your house was being used, right, to sell illicit drugs. Right. Okay. And you go to the authorities after the people get caught and say, I really had no idea, officer. My guess is that even if that's true, right, a jury's going to have a really hard time not placing some of the blame on you for, well, it was your property though, right? It was your job to know that this was going on. It's too bad that you didn't, but you should have. You should have known that this was happening because it was your property and you allowed these people to be there.
Right.
Granted, and here's the big caveat, this is on a totally different scale, right? This isn't one dude in Lance's backyard selling pot. This is millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people that these platforms, like in Facebook's case, over 2 billion users. So there's also the side, their
but it's
side,
more like
right,
being the landlord.
Sure.
And you've rented it out and they're doing these activities. So it's kind of that situation where you're you're not in the house. You're kind of a pseudo person, and you may live in another state, but own this house and this activity is going on. Well, hey, how can I be held responsible? I'm not even here. Well, your name's on the deed. Right. So therefore that's who we're coming after, kind of deal. I don't know I understand what you're saying. And here's the one thing though that really bothers me. And this was from one, I don't remember exactly whom, but this was one from a spokesperson for one of the platforms who said, this platform, we are against any illegal activity taking place on our platform. We're against that. Doggone it. We don't like it going on, and we understand how difficult it is for this situation is for parents to protect their children.
So it sounds tough.
Great. It sounds tough, but you didn't do anything. You're not saying, because basically you're saying, you know what? You can't sue us. We're not responsible.
Yep.
And unfortunately, as I told you, my stance, my opinion is they are responsible because this is the medium, and they can say they're not a medium, but they are, because this is a place where people are going to do this activity. And we hold other people responsible as being people who have to, like teachers and clergy and other people who have to be first reporters, who have to report on these things if we hear them. So as your site, I think they need to be, as your platform, they need to be held at least to that standard, if not even a higher standard. Now, that's my take. And we're not talking about, I understand the privacy issue, but when criminal activity is taking place, especially criminal activity against children, I guess it shouldn't make a difference, but many people in our society do draw that parallel, against children. We tend to step in and do a little bit more to protect them
we might
than
for
we do
other
adults, than adults who can hopefully process things a little bit better because they have developed, their brain and everything else in a little more knowledge base.
I tend to hedge toward
I don't know.
that same argument. And this is why the conversation's important, because I think we need more people than just Lance and I talking about it, right?
Right.
Because there is that.
Because we can't think of everything.
No,
we try, but we can't think of everything.
Can't do it all. So, Lance, we've challenged people this year to bring others into the program, because these conversations, especially like this one today, they're much more effective. The more people that know about it, the more likely we can make a change. So if you were going to tell somebody, this is a syndicated radio program, so they could listen AM or FM radio if there's a station near them, but they can also listen to it as a podcast released on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So if you're going to invite them to tune into the podcast, what are the different ways you might share?
Well, if they've never done it before, they can't check their history. So they could go to Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, or anywhere else fine podcasts are found. And then once they've listened to us, then they can go to their history and find out what the new show is.
And just go right there.
There you go.
And if you want access to all the different ways to listen, the stateofus.org has lots of links to articles, but it also has links to the places to listen. It's got Lance and I's book list, books that have been on the show, as well as upcoming books. And there's some good ones on the horizon, so definitely check it out. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.